So Beyonce is in trouble now. Beyonce is in trouble. People are boycotting her and people are rallying up against her, and they're protesting against her because of her performance that tributes Radical Black Panthers in her Black Lives Matter agenda or movement or whatever it's called. And of course you would. I mean, it's only a matter of time. If it wasn't Beyonce, it would have been someone else, Rihanna or Jay-Z or someone. And I've heard so many debates about this, and a lot of people are trying to pinpoint the problem and stuff, and they say things like, oh, it's racism. It's racism. Yeah, racism is part of the problem, but it's not the root. There was a debate going on, and they were talking about how they were saying that, well, if white cops weren't so racist, they wouldn't kill black people in the first place, or if black people weren't so violent, the white cops wouldn't have the impulse to shoot them or whatever it is. But they're trying to pinpoint the problem here. They're trying to pinpoint the root of the problem. Listen, the root of the problem is none of that. It's not racism. It's not violent black people. It's not prejudiced white cops or whatever. That's not the root of the problem. Those are just the byproducts of the real problem, which is sin. Sin is the real problem. Sin is the root of the problem. I mean, think about it. If we are, what's sin? 1 John 3:4 says, sin is the transgression of the law. So if you transgress the law, if you break the 10 commandments, you're sinning, right? Thou shalt not kill is part of that 10 commandments. Think about it. If we all kept the law, if we all kept the 10 commandments, none of this would happen. There would be no Black Panther movement. There would be no Black Lives Matter movement. There would be no racist cops. There'd be no violence. There'd be no killing. There'd be no stealing. There'd be no disrespecting each other. None of that would happen. To be honest with you, cops wouldn't exist if we all kept the 10 commandments. I mean, all of humanity in the world. Think about that. Imagine a world where there's nobody sins. Imagine a world where there's no killing and no stealing and no disrespecting parents. And you know what I mean? Imagine that. So the root of the problem is sin. If you really want to fix this problem, you got to stop sinning. But we're all sinners. I'm a sinner. You're a sinner. Everybody's a sinner. Beyonce's a sinner. How do you stop sinning then? How do you stop sinning? How do you stop that from happening? Because since that's the root of the problem, how do you stop it from happening? You by yourself, you can't. You can't stop that from happening. There's this verse that Paul says. Paul says something like this. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that's not a quote. That's not a quote that football players should use. Okay? That's not a quote for football players that football players use when they rise to victory in the Super Bowl, right? You don't use that because Paul was in prison when he said that. Paul was in prison when he said that. What is prison a symbol of in the Bible? Check this out. Acts 8, verse 22 and 23. Repent therefore of this thy wickedness, and pray God, if perhaps the thought of thine heart may be forgiven thee. For I perceive that thou art in the gall of bitterness, and in the bond of iniquity. In the bond of iniquity. Iniquity means sin or unrighteousness or injustice. Sin. The bond of iniquity. Bond means to bind together. To be bind together. To be tied up. To be in captivity. Captivity, prison. Prison in the Bible is a symbol for sin. So if you read that verse again from Paul that says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. He was in prison when he wrote that. So that means he can do all things through Christ who strengthens him. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. What's our prison right now? Sin. Sin is our prison. How do we break free from sin? We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. Remember in Matthew 19, when Jesus was talking to the rich man and turned to his disciple and said, the rich man, is really hard for rich people to enter the kingdom of heaven. And his disciples said, well, if it's impossible, who then can be saved? If this rich man cannot be saved, who then can be saved? And then Jesus turned to them and said, with men, it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Matthew 19, verse 26. It's possible for us to break free from sin, but not on our own. We need God to strengthen us. So yeah, there's violence in the world. That's the world that we live in. You can't stop sinners from sinning. Racist white cops killing black men. Sinners are just doing what sinners do. Beyonce reacting to that. What can you do? That's what people do. We're sinners. So these are not the root of the problem. These are just byproducts of the real problem, which is sin. Beyonce is a sinner just like you and me. So what we need to do is realize that the root of the problem is sin. And when we realize that the root of the problem is sin and we turn to God, then things will change. But if we try to solve the problem ourselves, you get a Beyonce on stage at a Super Bowl doing whatever she does, protesting or doing the Black Lives Matter, whatever thing that, whatever is popular nowadays. That's what they do. That's what sinners do. That's what humans do. We sin. That's how we solve problems. Nobody wants God to solve the problem. We want to take matters into our own hands and solve the problems ourselves. And what ends up happening is we mess it all up. And then we realize that we need God in the first place. People lose their lives every day. People get killed every day. It's black people, white people, Asians, Mexicans. What we need to realize is that our problem solving doesn't work. It's making things worse. And we need to turn to God because His solution is for us to keep the commandments. And if we just kept the commandments, none of this would happen. I know probably some of you guys probably think that this is corny, but that's the truth.